Check, 1, 2.
One, two, three.
Welcome to Pièce de Résistance, a show about the geopolitical stakes of a world in turmoil. From London, I'm your host, Stan Wojewodzki. In our first episode of Pièce de Résistance, we covered the risks and rewards of regime change in Venezuela with Dr. Chris Sabatini. This conversation was no doubt prescient and covered a lot of the concerns being discussed today on the heels of this major coup de force by the Trump administration. And as the focus of the administration turns to Venezuelan oil and its 300 billion barrel reserve, and President Trump convened last Friday all the U.S. oil majors to mobilize them behind his energy policy, it is my pleasure to welcome to the geopolitical bunker today Ali Moshiri, a 40-plus year veteran of the oil industry, who spent his entire career at Chevron and the last 25 years overseeing Latin America and Africa as president of that company. Few, if any, have his breadth of experience in Venezuela, the risks and rewards of investing in its oil sector, and what this daring new U.S. policy means for investors, global energy markets, the petrodollar supremacy, and the region as a whole. Following his retirement from Chevron, and although he still retains a role as advisor to the board and chairman, he is now president and CEO of AMOS Global Energy, an asset management firm based in Houston, currently raising a $2 billion fund to deploy in Venezuela's oil sector. Ali, good morning, and thank you for accepting to step into the geopolitical bunker at such a momentous time for the energy sector in Venezuela.
Well, my pleasure. My pleasure to be talking to you, and it's a great timing to talk about Venezuela. I think the level of interest since last Saturday has increased significantly, and it has shifted from focusing on Venezuela, on illegal migrants and the gang, to opportunity and what we can do for Venezuela.
Well, in the last 15 years that I've known you, you've always been bullish and long through thick and thin on Venezuela's oil sector, whether at Chevron or since creating AMOS Global Energy. And under your leadership, Chevron, more than any other majors, has weathered and navigated the very complex and perilous relation with the Chavez and Maduro regimes, where others, like Exxon or ConocoPhillips, have perhaps failed. Today, Chevron stands most to gain from the new White House policy, so let's start with the past before we move to the present and future prospects. What did you get right in betting on Venezuela that your competitors might not have?
Well, I've worked for a wonderful company, Chevron, for almost 40 years. An attitude of the company and the way that I was trained, that when you enter a country, you commit yourself to the people and basically trying to access the natural resources in the right way and advocate that you are there for the long term. Well, that has been our attitude, and I very much adopted that attitude. When the event in 2006 happened in Venezuela, uh, I very much took that philosophy forward. That there are large resources in here. Our big challenges is below the ground, and any challenges above the ground has to be managed. And so far, during my era with the company and after that, they done a great job to do that. And that just really showed the philosophy of the company, that they are there for the long term. They understand the natural resources, and um, the political side of it is change. And if you're trying to adjust your business with the political cycle, you will be in and out. And our business, it's very difficult to do that.
Now, in the 25 years you've been involved in, specifically in Venezuela, you've seen production levels drop from its peak at 5 million barrels a day to just shy of about 1 million barrels today. Some experts estimate it will take several years and over 150 billion in new investment to bring it back to 3 million barrels output?
Okay, this is a very good question, and there is a lot of misinformation is out there. My company been working on Venezuela, and we done a great analysis of what does it take to turn around the economy of Venezuela. And turning around the economy of Venezuela is only depend on oil production. Therefore, let me give you some information. Uh, for Venezuela to increase the production to 1.5 million barrels is relatively easy. It can be done about 12 to 18 months and probably takes somewhere between $5 and $7 billion. To move the production from 1.5 to 2.5, then you need to spend a lot of money on infrastructure, upgrading the facility, storage tank, pipeline, and so forth to get it to 2.5 million. Does Venezuela has the capacity to get to 2.5 million barrels a day? The answer is yes. It demonstrated, and I personally believe with the right amount of funding, you can get there. How long would it take to get there? To get to 2.5 million barrels a day, you need somewhere around 60 to 80 billion dollars. You can see the incremental capital expenditure between 500,000 barrels a day increase versus 1 million. That's the reason we are advocating that the first step has to be to increase the production to 1.5. If you increase the production to 1.5, the GDP of Venezuela is going to be somewhere around 200 to 250 billion dollars, at somewhere between 60 and $65 oil prices. We have done this modeling, and we are very confident that can be done. Now, for Venezuela to get above 2.5, it's going to be a big challenge. It got to be right oil prices. And also, you got to recognize right now we are in the situation on the oil prices that can go, there is a higher probability it will go down than goes up. Because if you look at the supply and demand, the fundamental tells you we are oversupplied. For incremental above 2.5, it's going to require more than just investment. It requires that you have to have the right oil prices and so forth. For people are very much focusing on the volumetrics. But when you come to the investment, it got to be a combination of volumetric and price. And that's going to dictate how far Venezuela can go. From the volumetric side of it, I really doubt it they can get to 5 million barrels. I think the target that is going to be somewhere between 3 and 3.5. That looking at is somewhere about 80 to $85 oil price on the long-term period of time.
Now, one of your competitors, I will not name, told President Trump last Friday that the country's oil sector is currently uninvestable. Do you concur with this assessment, and what needs to change, according to you, in the current local law to unleash the U.S. capital in that sector?
Well, I'm not going to speak for another company, but I think that's one company attitude and uh, basically the way that they see Venezuela. Um, from my point of view, Venezuela energy sector need investment. It's a great opportunity for investors to go to Venezuela. It can provide a good return on short term, mid term, and long term. Indeed, there is always a political risk. Everywhere you're looking at it, there is a political risk when the policy of the country changes, including our own country. Uh, During the President Biden, there was a different attitude and policy towards oil and gas. With President Trump, it's different. Or you got to be able to maneuver that and move forward. I don't necessarily agree with the comment, but again, that could be based on the strategy of the company that you mentioned. And if they believe, based on their portfolio, it's not a place to invest, that's their choice. And I think that attitude was very much in 2006 about Venezuela when some of the company left. And we decided, well, it's not the case. And you can see the results.
Now, let's speak a bit about the cost of extracting and transporting the very heavy crude found in the Orinoco Belt, often referred to in the industry as bitumen. Where does the break-even point and cost of extracting a barrel stand at today in Venezuela? How does that compare with, say, Alberta's bitumen? And how will that impact prices at the pump, if at all?
Well, let's talk about the resources in Venezuela. Uh, about one third of the 300 billion barrels that we talk about it and is all over the news, about 30 to 40% of it is the light oil. The rest of it is heavy oil from the Faja Belt. And the number of 300 refers to the recovery factor of 20%. And so far, we have been achieving somewhere around 8%. For to increase the reserve to 20% recovery, it requires secondary recovery, such as a steam flood and all that, that increase the recovery factor. The break-even oil price for the heavy oil in Faja is relatively low. The reason for that is uh, oil sector in Venezuela is land located. Environment is very good for drilling. You don't have a different seasons for drilling like you got some other place. It's not an offshore with the logistic issue and so forth. I think you'll be able to, in the right operation, to be able to break even price on the heavy oil side. If you use a diluent to dilute the heavy oil to somewhere between $45 a barrel. That would be the break even price.
Now, with security concerns front and center, including with non-state actors such as ELN, FARC dissidents, guerrillas in 8 of the 24 provinces, but also transnational criminal organizations operating in various parts of the territory, what do you anticipate the security cost per barrel to be for U.S. operators and contractors moving forward to guarantee personnel safety and critical infrastructure?
Well, security and safety of the facility and personnel is always number one with every company. And they would put mitigation around it to be able to manage it. Remember, I was responsible for operation in Colombia, in northern Colombia. That was ELN and FARC was operating, and the company managed to stay there for many, many years. I think that is a part of the normal operation. And you got to know the landscape of where you're operating. You got to utilize uh, have a good relationship with the local community, have a good relationship with the government, and you'll be able to mitigate this risk. And again, it's part of the whole equation of extracting oil and gas. Therefore, every company has to have its own plan and look at those. I don't think necessary is a big signpost for not entering a country, but it's something that you have to manage it and you need to understand it.
Since leaving Chevron, you've launched an asset management firm in Houston called AMOS Global Energy and are currently raising a $2 billion fund to deploy on oil assets in Venezuela. Can you speak a little to your strategy, the assets identified, the types of investors that you've brought on, and how quickly you can operationalize this investment? And have you already obtained signals from Treasury with regard to OFAC licenses to operate those?
Uh, Let me go back a little bit. We had started this process actually during the first term of President Trump administration. We partnered with one of the large capital fund in the United States, and we developed a program for a $1 billion fund for Venezuela. And that's when President Trump administration recognized Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela. That $1 billion was a public-private fund. That 400 million was coming from the private and 600 million from the public. And we were in discussion at that time with DFC. Um, After the first term of President Trump, uh, COVID hit, then Biden administration came in place. That concept kind of went away. And then we got into the issue of the Venezuelan migration to the United States and other relative issues regarding Venezuela. Therefore, it was very tough to get anybody interested to talk about Venezuela. When recent event happened, the level of interest by investors has increased significantly. And that's the reason we really jumpstart on what we started many years ago to continue with it. We have received many calls from investors. They are very interested, but I think it's all about walking through the process and see who would be our lead investors. And the $2 billion we are asking, actually, the structure of it is going to be a drawdown um, fund that basically the first part is going to be around 500 million, and then we incrementally increase it. Our approach to Venezuela is being fast and scale our operation. Some folks prefer to wait till there is a stability and they have control. I think that's going to come way down the road. And we believe that if we go fast and be able to scale our operation, we have a better chance to capture the better opportunity than if we wait later on.
Now, assuming a best case scenario in which the political transition eventually leads to a return to democratic governance and security concerns remain stable in Venezuela in the coming months, how will President Trump's move on Venezuelan oil impact global energy markets and the supremacy of the petrodollar? And how will that impact other oil producers in the region, from Mexico to Brazil and Canada, but also shale gas producers in the US, in your view?
Well, you, I think that the first step in this process for administration is to identify who is going to be administrating and running Venezuela. That's the number one before even investment is start going to the country. That's the number one. That's the first signpost. All investors are waiting for that, and whether or not it's going to be somebody from the current system or somebody from the opposition. That's the key factor in any investment going there. The initial incremental production increase in Venezuela is not going to have a significant impact on the global supply. You got to look at the Venezuela getting to 2.5 million barrels. That is going to have an impact on the global supply. It's going to be way down the road because the infrastructure cannot handle 2.5. Absolutely not. You need to spend a lot of money, a lot of funding got to come in, and I believe the private sector going to bring funding, some of the major going to bring funding, but at the end of the day, the public sector, including U.S. government, got to participate in this to get it to 2.5 million barrels a day. At that point, you got to look at it, what impact it's going to have, and whether or not even Venezuela going to stay in OPEC or not. That's another key point in this the big decision for Venezuela. Um, I think in the short term, midterm, Venezuela production is not going to be as significant if you look at the situation between Ukraine and Russia. If the peace process completed there, Russia got access to the market. The Iran situation, if it resolved itself in the favor of the people, and when Iran can increase the production to 4 million barrels very quickly, that's going to have a more impact on the global market than Venezuela on the short term and midterm.
And what is the political message that the Trump administration is sending to friends and foes and other producers alike who had started trading in non-dollar currency? Is this the return of the petrodollar supremacy, or do you think adversaries will still engage with producing countries in other currencies to undermine the dollar?
Well, I think from my point of view, oil going to be traded in dollars for time being, because if you look at the largest producers, Saudi Arabia, Gulf states, all those countries, the preference is a dollar. For that's not going to be a play big role in any type of the oil sector. From the production point of view, you pointed out about Permian. One of the concerns that I have about Permian is while the production is increasing, we got to recognize that this increase in the production is an acceleration. It's not an incremental. And at one point, we're going to have a turning point in the production in Permian and unconventional in the United States. I don't know when that will be. I have my own calculation, but that day going to happen. And I think it's going to be sooner than later. Uh, and when you see that, then dependency on the energy outside the United States going to significantly increase. And I think it's very important from the energy security for our country that we also look at some of these assets in Middle East, in Venezuela, and make sure our energy security is always there.
You talk about energy security. Um, it seems that one of the consequences of the Ukraine conflict has been the massive revenues generated for U.S. Producers to supply Europe. I believe it is upwards of 130 billion euros over the last 3-4 years. Do you see this strategic dependency on the part of Europe continue on U.S. oil and potentially its now Venezuelan reserves? Or do you think Europe will find ways to reduce that strategic dependency on U.S.?
I don't think so. I think there is a strong link between US and Europe. Again, if you look at the free market, the commodity going to move where the best market is. And Europe definitely need that energy. Despite of they are going to the extreme of green energy and so forth, at the end of the day, they have two choices. Depend on the US energy or Russian energy. And they experienced that before. And they find out, if you recall it, during the early part of the Russia invasion of Ukraine, and you saw what's happened to Europe energy sector. Therefore, dependency to a market that is stable and reliable like US, you got to be their strategy. And I don't think that's going to change at all.
I'm going to tap, before we go into our concluding statements, into your crystal ball and ask you where you see Venezuela on January 1st, 2027, both politically and in terms of your business line.
Uh, well, uh, I tell you, I'm hoping that even earlier than that, we see Venezuela that people got a good life, they got security, the economy is growing, and and we got a good relationship with the people of Venezuela, and they got a stable political system in transition, a really free election. I really believe Venezuela deserve a true free election by participation of the different parties to select the best person to run the country. Venezuelans are the wonderful people. Uh, my family, my wife's family are Venezuelan. Therefore, my kids born in Venezuela. Therefore, I can tell you they are entrepreneur. They are more driven by economy of the country rather than ideology. A lot of people miss that. They don't understand that if you bring the economy into the country and bring opportunity to Venezuela, Venezuela can be a wonderful country, regardless of whoever is running it.
Well, those words I'm sure resonate with a lot of our viewers, especially in the Latin American and Venezuelan diaspora. And as some say, from your mouth to God's ear. Thank you, Ali, for sharing your unique understanding of what is currently at stake in the land of Bolivar. We wish you and Amos much success in this fundraising and upcoming deployment. We hope you'll accept once again to join us on a future show so that you can update our viewers on your progress. And I think this concludes today's show. Do you want to have some concluding statements, perhaps?
I just want to send a message to my friends and family in Venezuela. Be optimistic. Help is on the way, and hopefully we see a beautiful Venezuela in very short period of time. And I wish investors take a look at the Venezuela in the different angle from the optimistic side of it. And we see a lot of investment going back to the country.
Thank you so much, Ali, for joining us on the show. Our next show will likely be determined by the news cycle, but certainly topics like Cuba, NATO, Greenland, the midterm prospects, and the U.S. relation to its allies and adversaries will most likely be covered as we try to make sense of the world around us. We invite you to share with us what topics you'd like us to cover in a future episode, and thank you for tuning in to Pièce de Résistance.
Great, thanks Phil.